23 September. Welcome to the President's Daily Brief. I'm Mike Baker, your eyes and ears on the world's stage. And I apologize if you're watching on YouTube, on our the juggernaut of a channel on YouTube, at President's Daily Brief. I apologize for my rather disheveled look. Just got back from a trek up into the beautiful mountains of Idaho. And no time to get tidied up. So we're straight into it, and that means let's get briefed, shall we? First up, fears of an all-out war between Israel and Hezbollah are growing as the terror group launches a major retaliatory strike after last week's complex pager and walkie-talkie operations, firing over 100 rockets into northern Israel. We'll have the details. Later in the show, we'll examine reports that Russian intelligence services are increasing their presence in Mexico, conducting spy operations targeting the United States in a move reminiscent of the Cold War. Then, we'll shift to Russia, where Ukraine continues its effective campaign of destruction targeting Russian ammunition depots. And in today's Back of the Brief, the UN General Assembly kicks off this week. We'll break down what's on the agenda, besides turning New York City traffic into a complete goat rope with police roadblocks and blocked-off streets as hordes of UN diplomats and assorted toadies race to their restaurant and shopping adventures. Oh, and some speeches will be given, too, I suppose. But first, today's PDB Spotlight. Iranian-backed Hezbollah made good on its promise to retaliate after a week that saw scores of their members killed and wounded from exploding communication devices, and several key leaders eliminated by Israeli airstrikes. On early Sunday, the terror group launched approximately 150 rockets, cruise missiles, and drones into Israel's Jezreel Valley, one of the largest barrages since the start of the conflict last year, with rockets sent further south than previous strikes. The attack specifically targeted an airbase near Haifa for the first time in the war. Most were intercepted, but 6 people were reported injured in the attack, mostly with shrapnel injuries. Hezbollah's deputy leader declared the attack was just the beginning, adding that it was part of a, quote, open-ended battle of reckoning that's now underway between the Iran-backed group and Israel. In addition, Israeli air defenses shot down a pair of cruise missiles and 2 drones fired from inside Iraq on Sunday, none of which hit Israeli territory. A group of Iran-backed Iraqi militias claimed responsibility for those attacks. For its part, Israel fired nearly 300 rockets into southern Lebanon on Saturday in what the military said was preemptive action against the planned Hezbollah attack. Israel continued its strikes into Sunday, with Lebanon's official national news agency reporting 2 people were killed Sunday morning in southern Lebanon. Meanwhile, Hezbollah acknowledged this weekend that the Israeli strike on its leaders last Friday was more deadly than initially reported. The group said that a second senior commander, Ahmed Mahmoud Wabi, was among 16 fighters killed. Wabi was the head of the group's operations against Israel from the onset of the Gaza war up until the start of this year. As we reported last week, Wabi was eliminated alongside the head of Hezbollah's elite Radwan force. That's Ibrahim Aqil. Aqil was also a principal member of a terrorist cell that carried out a number of terrorist attacks in the 1980s, including the 1983 Beirut barracks bombing that killed 241 U.S. service members, and the 1983 bombing of the U.S. Embassy in Beirut that killed 63. Now, that payback for Aqil was 41 years in the making. We're also learning more about the meeting itself and why so many commanders were in the same place last Friday. A Hezbollah source told the Al Monitor news site that the senior Hezbollah leaders killed in that strike were meeting to discuss plans to invade Israel in an October 7-style attack in response to the pager explosions. IDF spokesman Daniel Hagari said of the plan, quote, Hezbollah intended to raid Israeli territory, occupy the communities of the Galilee, and murder and kidnap Israeli citizens, similar to what Hamas did on 7 October. All right, coming up after the break, Russian intelligence operations are expanding just south of America's border, and Ukraine continues its campaign against Russian ammunition depots. I'll have those stories when we come back. Welcome back to the PDB. Turning to Mexico, where Russia's intelligence operations are expanding, with U.S. officials increasingly alarmed by Moscow's growing activities south of the border. This buildup, part of a broader return to Cold War-style tactics, is seen as an effort to target the U.S. while undermining Washington's support for Ukraine. Since Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022, Moscow's intelligence officers have been expelled from numerous European capitals, forcing them to seek new bases of operation. Mexico, with its proximity to the U.S., emerges, naturally, as a prime choice, with Russia significantly increasing its embassy personnel in Mexico City. Now, Moscow's interest in Mexico certainly isn't new. It dates all the way back to the 1940 assassination, you could argue, of Leon Trotsky by a Soviet agent after a falling out with Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin. Now, getting sideways with Stalin rarely had an upside. High-profile espionage cases, such as Christopher Boyce and Andrew Dalton Lee's sale of satellite secrets in the 1970s, and Hector Cabrera Fuentes' guilty plea for spying in Miami just 2 years ago, underscore Mexico as a hub for covert Russian operations. During the Cold War, Mexico City was essentially the Vienna of Latin America, with agents from various services engaged in espionage and intrigue. The Soviet and Cuban embassies were hives of spying activity, and in a tantalizing bit of history, Lee Harvey Oswald made a documented trip to Mexico City in September of '63, where he made contact multiple times with the Soviet and Cuban embassies. Now, what's old is clearly new again. Russia's increased intelligence operations in Mexico have raised alarms within the Biden administration. CIA Director William Burns recently emphasized that U.S. intelligence is, quote, sharply focused on Russia's growing footprint there, stressing that many expelled Russian agents have relocated to Mexico. Burns' statement echoes warnings from Air Force General Glenn Van Herk, who testified before the Senate Armed Services Committee in 2022 that Russia's GRU military intelligence service had a significant presence in Mexico. Van Herk cautioned at the time, quote, the largest portion of GRU members in the world is in Mexico right now. These intelligence personnel are closely monitoring opportunities to influence U.S. operations, end quote. Since Van Herk's testimony, Russia has continued to deepen its presence in Mexico, adding more personnel to its embassy in Mexico City. Many of these staff members have received official accreditation from the Mexican government, further signaling the Kremlin's commitment to bolstering its espionage capabilities. Despite these concerns, Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador has downplayed the issue, asserting Mexico's sovereignty. However, Russia's deepening intelligence network poses a growing threat. Moscow uses Mexico as a base to meet U.S. operatives, arrange debriefings, and provide logistical support, all while avoiding U.S. law enforcement scrutiny. Mexico's less restrictive environment allows Russia to stage intelligence operations and potentially even sabotage efforts should tensions between the U.S. and Russia escalate. Russia has ramped up its disinformation efforts in Mexico as well. State-backed media outlet RT has expanded operations in the country, spreading propaganda aimed at reducing support for Ukraine and fueling divisions within Mexico and the U.S. In April, Russia's ambassador to Mexico falsely claimed U.S. collusion with drug cartels to support Ukraine's war efforts, a narrative echoed by some local outlets. As the U.S. raises concerns with Mexican authorities, Russia's intelligence buildup remains a critical issue for Washington as it seeks to safeguard its interests in the Western Hemisphere and counter Moscow's influence. All right, shifting to the war in Ukraine. Kyiv announced on Saturday it successfully struck 2 Russian munitions depots overnight, demonstrating its growing ability to hit targets deeper inside Russian territory. The attacks, carried out by drones, targeted munitions depots in southern and western Russia, underscoring Kyiv's evolving approach in the nearly 31-month-long war. Ukraine has increasingly relied on drone technology to offset Russia's arsenal of long-range missiles. Over the past year, Ukraine's domestic intelligence service, the SBU, has led a series of drone strikes aimed at destabilizing Russia's military supply chains. In his daily evening address, Ukrainian President Zelensky confirmed that a drone strike hit a munitions depot in Tikhoretsk district, located in Russia's southern Krasnodar region. Zelensky described the depot as a major storage site. Zelensky stated, quote, "These were stockpiles of Russian tactical missiles and guided bombs, everything that Russia uses to terrorize our cities and our positions." Ukraine's military general staff emphasized the significance of the Tikhoretsk facility, calling it one of the, quote, 3 largest ammunition storage bases in Russia. Social media footage captured a massive nighttime explosion at the depot, initially resembling fireworks before erupting into a loud blast. The Ukrainian military statement added that a train carrying roughly 2,200 tons of munitions was also struck. The train, potentially also carrying munitions from North Korea, was present at the facility at the time of the attack. If confirmed, this would, of course, mark a severe setback for Russia's supply chain. In addition to the strike on Tikhoretsk, another depot in Russia's western Tver region was also targeted. A Ukrainian security source, speaking anonymously, confirmed the SBU conducted that strike independently. Local Russian officials confirmed the attacks. The governor of the Krasnodar region reported that over 1,200 district residents were evacuated, with authorities issuing a local emergency to manage the aftermath of the strikes. Now, these drone strikes come as Zelensky visits the U.S. during UN General Assembly Week to present his, quote, victory plan aimed at securing long-range weapons from Washington to bolster Ukraine's military efforts. Zelensky stated, quote, "I want to emphasize that we are doing this with our capabilities, with our weapons," end quote. Ukraine's ability to target munitions depots deep inside Russia is a significant strategic development. By demonstrating the effectiveness of the drone operations, Kyiv may strengthen its case for receiving more advanced weaponry, including long-range missiles, which could further tip the balance in the conflict. All right, coming up in the back of the brief. World leaders are converging on New York City for the start of the 79th session of the United Nations General Assembly. Now, the hot air and methane gas produced from the crap generated by the assembly is considered by many to be a leading cause of climate change. There's an interesting fact. I'll have the details when we come back. In today's back of the brief, world leaders gather in New York for the 79th United Nations General Assembly, which runs for 6 days beginning Tuesday. This year's focus is on critical global crises, wars in Ukraine and Gaza, rising tensions in the Middle East, and growing calls for UN reforms. The Israel-Hamas war is expected to dominate discussions. That's what you would expect. Many countries will likely push for a ceasefire to prevent the conflict from spreading further across the Middle East. Simultaneously, the war in Ukraine, now over 2.5 years long, will feature heavily, with global appeals for peace set to intensify during the assembly. Well, that should do it. Momentum is also building for reforming the UN Security Council. This is interesting, particularly after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Yes, Russia remains a permanent member of the UN Security Council. Leaders from Africa, Brazil, Germany, and India are expected to push for changes that would reduce the concentration of veto power held by the 5 permanent members. Reform ideas include expanding the Council's membership to reflect the current global landscape better and limiting the veto power of these members. I've got another reform idea. How about you just shut it down? President Biden, remember him? Well, he's making one of his final major global appearances. He'll address the assembly and likely draw significant attention, you would imagine. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Zelensky will speak twice, first on Tuesday at a high-level meeting of the UN Security Council, and again on Wednesday morning at the General Assembly. Brazil will open the speeches, followed by the U.S. as the host country. Oh, there's another reform idea. If we're not going to shut it down, maybe just move the headquarters to Switzerland. Israeli Prime Minister, they can deal with the traffic then during General Assembly Week. I guess I'm sounding very cynical, aren't I? But have you ever been to New York during UN General Assembly Week? My God, it's like the 7th ring of hell. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, a former UN ambassador, is expected to speak later in the week, with reports suggesting that several delegations may stage walkouts in protest. Of course they will. Russian President Putin and Chinese President Xi Jinping are notably absent, sending their foreign ministers instead. a trend continued from last year. Preceding the General Assembly, the Summit of the Future, which began on Sunday. That sounds very grand, doesn't it? The Summit of the Future. Well, they're tackling long-term global governance challenges, such as reforms to the UN Security Council and regulation of artificial intelligence. Spearheaded by UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, the summit sets a stage for ambitious proposals to address global conflicts, climate change, there it is, and improving governance. And that, my friends, is the President's Daily Brief for Monday, 23 September. Now, if you have any questions or comments, please reach out to me at pdb@thefirsttv.com. And, of course, to listen to the show ad-free, well, it's very simple. Become a premium member of the President's Daily Brief by visiting pdbpremium.com. See, I told you it was simple. And I hope you had a chance to check out this past weekend's PDB Situation Report. That, of course, is our extended weekend show with terrific guests and insight and news. It's available on our YouTube channel. Check that out. It's at President's Daily Brief, or wherever you get your podcast stuff from. Our guests included, for this past weekend, former military signals intelligence analyst Kervin O'Quinn. We dug into the pager and walkie-talkie operations that shook Lebanon this past week, and former Secret Service agent Mike Matranga. And we looked into the second assassination attempt on former President Trump, as well as the likely reforms and changes to the Secret Service and as a result of the developments that have taken place over the past couple of months. I'm Mike Baker. I'll be back later today with the PDB Afternoon Bulletin. Until then, stay informed, stay safe, stay cool.